In this talk, I just want to pull together some of these ideas that I've talked about in previous talks. And I want to talk specifically about what I have called the duality consciousness, the dualistic consciousness, and how this works. And I said in a previous talk that, referring to Genesis, there was a fruit in the Garden of Eden called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And this is actually a symbol for this state of consciousness, because in this state of consciousness, you are defining what is good and what is evil. And so what we can say is that when we go below the 48th level of consciousness, we start seeing ourselves as separate beings. And what that means is that now our minds become closed systems, because we don't see ourselves as connected, and therefore we have cut off our intuition. Where basically what is happening is that it's not impossible for the conscious self to step outside of our perception filter below the 48th level, but it's very difficult to do so because we're actually denying that it's even possible. We are seeing ourselves as separate beings, so there's nothing to connect to. And what happens is that we are now trying to create a specific experience in this world. We have a sense that we're incomplete, but we are trying to create a sense of completeness. And we do this by building this worldview. And in order to build this, we use this duality consciousness, where we are defining, here's something that's right, here's something that's false, here's something that's good, here's something that's evil. Here's something that's real, and here's what is unreal. Now, I've explained that this is part of the outworkings of the law of free will, where we must be allowed to create any experience we want. And I've also explained that we must be able to come to a point where we experience that this experience is completely real. So we are defining that this is good and this is evil, and we are convinced that this is a real definition. In other words, we are convinced that it's based on some ultimate authority. In reality, what I'm trying to explain is that when we go into the duality consciousness, there are always two opposites. And it's not just a matter of good and evil, it's a matter of, for example, the classic example, you have capitalism, you have communism. And when you are in duality, you want to say capitalism is the truth, Marxism is the lie. Or if you are on the opposite, you want to say Marxism is the truth and capitalism is the lie. And you can see when you look back during the Cold War, there were people on both sides who were absolutely convinced that they were right. And how could they be, you can ask yourself. Now, you might have, as I did, I grew up in the West in a non-communist society, and many people in the West say, well, capitalism won. Soviet Union collapsed. Capitalism won. But this is just a product of the duality consciousness, that you interpret it that way. Because neither capitalism nor communism is the ultimate understanding of the economy or of society. There's more to understand. I'm not going to go into that discussion here because it's not what I want to talk about. I'm just using it as an example of how people are in this mindset that whenever there are these two opposites, one must be right, one must be wrong, one must be true, one must be false. Christianity is the only true religion. No. Islam is the only true religion. No, it's Buddhism. No, it's you can go on and on. So what happens is that when you, as I said, when you create a worldview, there is something you say, this is a truth we can rely on, this has the highest authority, this we don't need to question anymore. And therefore you are building a worldview that is relative. It's based on you not questioning this truth. But it's inevitable there will be another group of people who are willing to question your truth, but they have another relative truth that they have elevated to the status of being infallible. And so therefore there will always be clashes. And basically, I talk about the cosmic mirror. What is the underlying message we are projecting? Well, the vast majority of people in the world are below the 48th level. They are trapped in this illusion created by the dualistic mind. And they are projecting, I want to live in a world where it's possible to define that something is right, something is wrong, therefore my group of people is right and that other group of people is wrong. This is what all human beings who are trapped in this illusion of duality, what they are projecting. And that's why all of these groups of people that are in conflict, they think they are in conflict, they think they are opposed by these other people. They are actually helping each other have the experience they want to have. That they are in opposition to other people. And that they can define themselves as superior and other people as inferior. And you can see how ingenious the reality simulator is designed. Because as I've explained, you have certain actual conditions that are projected back by the reality simulator or projected by the reality simulator. But the sense of reality is created inside of people's minds. And that's why you can have the communists, these Marxists I met when I was young at university, from inside their minds, it was absolutely real. Marxism was absolutely real. And then from inside the minds of some of the capitalists, capitalism is actually absolutely real. So they're coming from opposite viewpoints, but they both have the experience that their viewpoint is absolutely real. And this is because of duality. The duality consciousness, the intellect that can analyze everything, that has a subconscious file folder that says this is reliable knowledge, this is unreliable knowledge. To a capitalist, anything that comes from Marx or communism is false knowledge. And everything that comes from the capitalist camp is reliable knowledge. There's a lot more to say about that, but I don't want to go into it here, because it will confuse the issue I want to talk about, which is basically how this duality consciousness allows us to create a self-validating system. But it's only self-validating because it's based on exclusion of anything that doesn't validate the system or the worldview. So you're not actually, you may be finding certain evidence that validates your worldview, but you are maintaining the sense of superiority because you are excluding anything that contradicts it. So basically we can say that, here could be a rule we can say, or a law we can say is, you can prove any point by excluding enough contrary evidence. If you're willing to exclude all contrary evidence, of course you can prove your point. That's why Shakespeare said 500 years ago, there is nothing good or bad, but thinking makes it so. And I've now explained how we have these subconscious selves. That's what projects that there's something that's good or bad. And I also explained that we can, as spiritual people, we can also be trapped in this wanting to validate our spiritual movement as the one that has the superior truth. But there is a deeper layer of this. And it's something you can see in the world. And as one example, let's just use Christianity. If you look at the Christian religion, and you look away from all the specifics, you look for deeper patterns. What's actually behind the Christian worldview? Well, what is behind is this projection that something has gone wrong on earth. Something has gone wrong. And they explain this by saying that there's a devil who's opposing God. And this devil can take over the minds of other people and make them oppose God's people, those who are God's people. And therefore, what is projected by the Christian religion is that there is this epic struggle in the world. The world is caught in this epic struggle between God and the devil. And as human beings, we are either on the side of the devil or we are on the side of God. And, you know, what I'm trying to get to here is this realization that once you have the idea of this epic struggle, you have the ultimate validation machine. You can say that all of these efforts that groups of people have been going through of creating a worldview and trying to validate it, you can say that they're doing this because the duality consciousness, the intellect, the separate self, they're forming this machine that can validate everything. And when you add the idea of the epic struggle to that, you have the ultimate validation machine. Because now anything is justified. So let's look at, for example, the Crusades. Here you have two groups of people, Muslims and Christians. Each group believes they have the superior religion. But ironically, they both recognize that their religion builds on a foundation called the Old Testament. Or at least the Christians call it the Old Testament. So they both recognized that there was some validity to the Old Testament and scriptures. And what's one of the central elements of the Old Testament? The Ten Commandments, right? And these Ten Commandments are pretty, they're sort of pretty black and white, you know, they're pretty clear cut. Thou shalt not kill. If you look at the Ten Commandments, there's really no gray zone there. There's no room for interpretation. Thou shalt not kill. It doesn't say, thou shalt not kill these people, but thou shalt kill those people. That's not what the Ten Commandments are saying, right? So here comes the Christians and the religions. They get in a conflict. And why do they get in a conflict? Because both are claiming they have the superior religion, the one and only religion. And then, of course, both of them, because they recognize the Old Testament, they think Jerusalem is such a holy place, and they both want to have it, and so they fight over this. But nevertheless, the mindset behind this is that both groups recognize the Ten Commandments, which says, thou shalt not kill, but here they go to war with each other. And not only are they setting aside this thou shalt not kill, they actually believe that killing the other group is justified. It's fully justified. Why? Because there's an epic struggle between God and the devil. And their group is on the side of God, and the other side is on the side of the devil. This is what the Christians believe. Islam is a false religion. The Muslims are taken over by the devil. The Christians are God's chosen people. And in order to fulfill God's cause, we have to kill the Muslims, those who are of the devil. And the Muslims believe the exact same thing. So this is the ultimate, this is what I call the ultimate validation machine. You can validate any viewpoint and be absolutely convinced that you're real. And that's because of this idea of an epic struggle. But what's really behind the epic struggle? Now, there are some Gnostic teachings, mystical teachings from the time of Jesus that talk about the world was created as a dualistic system. There was a God and there was a demiurge, a lesser God or the devil. And they were created in a pair to oppose each other. But this is actually what I explained. This is an illustration of the dualistic view, that there must be two opposites. So these Gnostic teachings are not talking about the real God here. They are talking about something that is created out of the duality consciousness. Because the real God can have no opposite. I mean, pure awareness, ultimate consciousness, there's no opposite there. The opposites come in, as I said, because we have been given free will, and when we go into the consciousness of duality, we are defining the opposites in relation to ourselves. But what's the underlying message? You can say, yeah, but Christianity says, or Jesus even said, there's a devil. In Buddhism, they talk about the demons of Mara. Mara is just another word for the devil, the prince of this world, as Jesus called it. But he also talked about Satan and the devil. So, isn't there some force that opposes God? And doesn't it make sense that he's working through these evil people? So isn't there an epic struggle? But what's really behind all of this is this idea, as I said, something went wrong with God's creation. So that's one element. Something went wrong with God's creation. It's inconsistent with the Christians who claim that God is, of course, the ultimate, has ultimate power. And therefore, if God is perfect, how could something have gone wrong? But they don't quite make that connection. They don't realize that there's actually a deep contradiction in how they look at God. Well, some realize this, and it's called the problem of evil. If God is almighty, why hasn't he wiped out evil? The fact that evil exists in the world and we can see it in the world, why hasn't God wiped it out if he is almighty? They also say, the Christians, God is all good. Well, either God is not almighty, and that's why he hasn't wiped evil, because he can't. Or God is not all good, and that he doesn't want to wipe out evil. So there's this projection that somehow something went wrong with God's creation. But now comes the next level of projection here, of the epic mindset. We, human beings here on earth, we can know what went wrong. We can understand what went wrong with God's creation. And therefore we, who really have this superior understanding that not even God really has, because if God knew what was wrong with his creation, he could have corrected it. So something went wrong and God didn't see it. But we human beings, we can see it. And therefore we who have this superior understanding, we can correct God's mistake. We can compensate for God's mistake. We can make things right again. And how do we do it? By killing those other people who are on the side of the devil. And when we've killed all the people who are on the side of the devil, they're only God's people on earth, and then God's kingdom will come on earth. This is the ultimate outcome of the epic mindset. When we have killed all of the capitalists, everybody will be communist, and then there will be the communist paradise on earth. And you can see conflict after conflict throughout world history based on the same pattern, this epic struggle. And it's, of course, in complete contradiction to everything that Jesus said, if you look at the Christian religion. Now, you can look at the Old Testament and you can say, there is this, an eye for an eye. And God says, I'm an angry and vengeful God, and I'll smite thy enemies. And he commands the Israelites to kill all the men, women, and children of these tribes that occupy the Holy Land. And so you can find in the Old Testament very much this dualistic mindset. But Jesus gave a completely different message. Jesus said, do unto others, turn the other cheek, do good to those that hate you, forgive 70 times 7. And why was Jesus giving this message? He appeared in the one place in the world, it wasn't the Holy Land. He didn't appear there because it was holy. He appeared because in the Middle East is where there are people who are the most trapped in the epic mindset. And what did Jesus attempt to do? He attempted to give a teaching and demonstrate a path that can lead people out of the epic mindset, out of duality. And how do you do it? Well, what have people been doing in the Old Testament? Somebody slaps you on the one cheek. Well, it's an eye for an eye. You have to slap him back. And Jesus says, okay, fine. If you want to stay in this never-ending struggle with other people, hit people back. But if you want to follow me into the real kingdom of God, turn the other cheek. And if somebody slaps you again, turn the other cheek. If you want to enter the kingdom, keep turning the other cheek. That's how you escape duality. And in the way I've described it here is, why do you want to hit back at somebody? Because you have a separate self that makes you take this personally, and you want to even the score. You want to revenge. You want to get your way. You have all of these separate selves. So what was Jesus saying? Whenever you are reacting through a separate self. Don't do what the separate self tells you to do. Turn the other cheek. Let go of the separate self. Let it die. Be willing to give up your life for my sake. Let the dead bury their dead. He who seeks to save his life shall lose it, but he who is willing to die for my sake shall find eternal life. Let the separate self die so that the conscious you can stand back and just be the person that descended from heaven who can descend back to heaven. In other words, Jesus was trying to show us a way beyond the dualistic struggle that's been ongoing for this planet for eons. The Buddha was doing the same thing. All true spiritual teachers are doing the same thing. And we have to simply come to a point in order to get beyond a certain level of the spiritual path where we see this dynamic and decide, I don't want to be part of it anymore. I don't want to be pulled into it. And that also means that we have to take a look at our approach to spiritual teachings. This was hard for me to do. This was probably one of the hardest things to do on the spiritual path. Because, when I was a child, I was very disturbed by war, the Holocaust, the concentration camps, torture, all of these things. I was so shocked that I was living on a planet where these things were taking place. And I clearly felt this shouldn't be taking place. And then when I found the spiritual path, I started realizing that I'm actually in embodiment on earth because I want to help raise the earth to the point where all of these things won't take place. I want to help improve the earth. And so I approached the spiritual path and spiritual teachings with a sense that I'm here to do something positive. And my first spiritual movement, the meditation movement, they said, the one solution to all problems is that people meditate. Because then they overcome the tensions and it improves the collective consciousness and reduces crime rates and all of this stuff. So they had this concept that spiritual people, we are here to improve yours. Then the second spiritual movement had it in an even more stronger way. They talked about ascended masters that had a plan for taking the earth into a golden age. The master Saint Germain has plans for a golden age. And we were here to help do this. And that's why we gave all of these countless hours of decrees to improve the world. So you can say from a certain perspective, well, isn't that just another version of the epic mindset? Well, yes and no, because it depends a little bit on how you approach it. First of all, as spiritual people, we're not violent, right? We don't believe in forcing people to accept our spiritual teaching or forcing society to conform to our spiritual teaching. So we have transcended what is really the essence of the epic mindset, is that you are willing to force other people to conform to your vision, your epic vision. So this is the really dysfunctional aspect of the epic mindset. You are willing to force others. We have transcended that. So, but we still can believe that it's our role, as I talked about in other videos, to convert everybody, to awaken everybody, to see that our spiritual teaching, our spiritual guru is the superior one. And I was in that mindset for many years. And I was willing to move from Denmark to America to be part of this second spiritual movement. I was willing to let my entire life revolve around giving all of these decrees, participating in all of these activities. And so I really put in an effort. And here's the subtle distinction here. I'm not saying it was wrong for me. I'm not saying that it didn't have a positive impact on the planet. Neither am I saying that other spiritual movements, and you can see many spiritual movements have the same mindset. We are here to be the ones that saves the planet. I'm not saying this is wrong. I'm not saying their efforts are wasted here. But what I am saying is that there can come a point where if you want to go high on the spiritual path, you need to question this. You need to see if your approach to the spiritual path has been affected by this epic mindset. And you need to realize, as I've already said, that it's not really the goal here that we convince and convert everybody to come into one spiritual movement and follow one spiritual guru, because people are different. It's really about these universal ideas. But how do you make that shift? If you have for years or decades been focused on working according to your spiritual movement, how do you free yourself from the epic aspect of that, where you think that everybody has to be converted to your movement and that your movement has the superior truth? How do you free yourself from that? Well, here's how it actually happened for me. And it happened because I started contemplating free will. It was always somewhat of an enigma for me. And when I processed many of the ideas I've talked about in previous talks, but really focused on free will, I had a breakthrough, an intuitive experience where I really saw this, and the words that came to me was, nothing has gone wrong in the universe. Nothing has gone wrong with God's plan. Nothing has gone wrong with God's design. Because what is the real purpose of God creating the world of form? It is that the Creator gives us an environment in which we can start out as extensions of the Creator, but we start out with a point-like, localized sense of self. And we have an environment that we interact with. And as we interact with this environment, we expand our sense of self. So, how do we grow in consciousness? Because we have two things. We have self-awareness and we have free will. So the self-awareness gives us the ability to make choices, but it also gives us the ability to evaluate the outcome of our choices, right? And by making a choice, evaluating the outcome, we can then say, do I want a different outcome? Well, then I have to make a different choice. But why did I make the choice I made? Because of my sense of self, my level of awareness. So the only way to change it is to change my sense of self, raise my awareness. This is how we grow, through free will and self-awareness. But in order for this to work itself out in the ultimate way, free will has to be absolutely free. That means that it has to be possible for people to go into this state that I've talked about, the duality consciousness, where now, instead of being a co-creator in the predefined environment, you think you can define your own environment, your own reality, right? And what actually helped me make this was that I received a teaching from the Ascended Masters that Earth is not the only planet with self-aware beings. There are billions of planets in our universe with self-aware beings. And the vast majority of these planets are at a much higher level than Earth. So all of this sense I had that these things like war and torture shouldn't be happening was based on having experienced in previous lifetimes one of these, what we can call natural planets, where these things are not taking place because the collective consciousness is so high that nobody harms other people. So the Earth is not a normal planet. It's not a natural planet. It's an unnatural planet. It's one among a few planets in the universe that's where these manifestations are still allowed. And this was a big blow to my ego, because I thought I was an important spiritual person and living on an important planet. And so if the planet is not only one among billions, but it's one of the lower planets, then what am I doing here? Why am I here? So you have to struggle a little bit with this. But I eventually came to where I was willing to let go of that and say, well, I don't need to feel superior anymore. I don't need to feel superior on Earth because I just want to get out of here. And how do I get out of here? Well, as long as I have an epic story that I think I need to fulfill here on Earth, I can't get out of here, right? Because I'm saying, I am here to effect a positive change on Earth. Which means I can't leave on that until that change has manifested. But what does that change depend on? It doesn't depend on my choices. It depends on the choices of other people. And what if they're not choosing what I want them to choose? Well, then I'm trapped here. I'm tied to Earth indefinitely. Perhaps that's why I've been here for many lifetimes. So if I don't free myself from this dynamic, I can't ascend after this lifetime. I'll have to stay here and keep being involved with this frustrated mindset because people aren't doing what I think they should be doing and the planet isn't the way I think it should be. So this is an element of the epic mindset that we can have in spiritual movements. I've seen many people have it. You can find any number of spiritual movements that have it. Now, again, don't get me wrong here. I'm not saying that all spiritual movements are based on an illusion. I'm not saying that it's all futile. I'm not saying they're not doing any good. It's just not the way we tend to see it when we first find the spiritual path, because when we find the spiritual path, we are trapped by what we were brought up, the way we were brought up to look at the world, and that's infused by this epic mindset that I've described. So, what is the reality beyond all of these dualistic images created on Earth? Well, the deeper reality is nothing has gone wrong with God's plan or God's creation. God planned to give people free will. And it was inevitable that some people would have to take free will to the extreme by going into this duality consciousness, where they are not trying to increase their connection with their higher selves and how God created the universe. They are trying to create their own reality. They can't actually create their own reality, but they can create their sense of reality, as I've explained. So people have been allowed to do this. It's perfectly natural. And there are a few planets where people are still trapped in this mindset, and Earth is one of them. And this, to me, explains so many things about what you see going on in the world today and what you see throughout history. It's really major breakthrough to realize this. And the way I used it was, of course, again, look at myself. Do I have elements of this epic consciousness? Do I even have an epic approach to the spiritual path? And I eventually came to realize that the reality here is people must be allowed to create any experience they want, but they must also have a way to get out of whatever experience they have created. They must free themselves of any choice they made. So you look at planet Earth. What's going on planet Earth? Well, the vast majority of people on Earth are trapped in a duality consciousness, trapped in a certain perception filter. They can't see an alternative. Why did the Buddha come to Earth? Why did Jesus come to Earth? Well, as I said, there is a group of universal spiritual teachers existing in the spiritual realm. They are assigned to help the people on Earth raise their consciousness, which means, among other things, that people can free themselves from these dualistic illusions, this epic mindset. But how can people do it if they don't see an example of somebody who has done it? And the Buddha demonstrated such an example. But what have the Buddhists done, as I talked about in an earlier video? They've idolized the Buddha, put him up on a pedestal. He was so special, that's why he could attain the Buddhic consciousness, but we ordinary people can't. Then comes Jesus. He also demonstrates a path to a higher level of consciousness. What have the Christians done with Jesus? Idolized him. He's the only Son of God, thereby destroying his example. Jesus wanted to be seen as an example. The works that I do shall ye do also. But the Christians have elevated him to an exception. And if you think you can follow Jesus into a higher state of consciousness, it's blasphemy. You are a heretic. You are of the devil. So what's the next stage in this plan that the Ascended Masters, our universal spiritual teachers, have for Earth? Well, if you send one person who has a higher level of consciousness, what can people do with that person? Idolize him. But what if you send 10,000 or millions of people who demonstrate a higher level of consciousness? Somebody who grew up in a normal environment as a normal human being, among your family and other people in your society. But after a certain time, you come to a point where you can demonstrate to people that there's a higher level of consciousness, there's a higher perspective. And if millions of people do this, how can you idolize all of them? How can you make all of them special? So that's what we're here to do. It's not an epic struggle. We are not engaged in an epic struggle. We are not here on an epic mission. We are here to free people from the epic struggle. But we can't free them. We can only demonstrate that we are free. But how do we demonstrate that we are free from the duality consciousness? Well, we kind of have to free ourselves from the duality consciousness first, don't we? Because if we are repeating the same pattern, thinking something has gone wrong with God's creation, but our spiritual movement, we are here to correct it, then we're really not demonstrating an alternative. We're just demonstrating another version of the epic struggle. So do you see what I'm trying to say here? We are spiritual people here to help raise the earth. Just we can't do it through the epic mindset. We can only do it by transcending the epic mindset.